Welcome to Paranormal Conversations. Random, off-the-cuff discussions on all things paranormal.
Hello, you spectacular people. Welcome to Paranormal Conversations number 27. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going to be joined by podcast creator and host Adam Lynch, who is from Ireland. And actually, this is just going to be me on this interview. You weren't able to join us for this one.
That is true.
But boy, do we have a fascinating discussion. We talk about American folklore versus Irish folklore. We talk about some of the folklore in Houston and Texas in general. And this interesting theory of living ghosts. You know, is that what doppelgangers are? Is there a way that we can project our spirits out into the world? Is that what some of these ghosts are that we see?
Interesting.
And then also he talks about the Houston Heights Batman. Interesting little bit of lore there back from in the 50s, which leads us into talking about this gargoyle that they saw on NASA property in Houston too. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy this conversation. On this Paranormal Conversation, we are joined by podcast creator and host Adam Lynch. He hosts the Houston Strange podcast, and that podcast features haunted houses, ghost stories, and eerie encounters in Houston and surrounding areas. As we know, Texas is full of some crazy stuff. How are you, Adam?
I'm doing good, Dan. Thank you so much for having me on. I was really excited to be on, to be honest. I've been like catching up on the podcast when I was at work and stuff last week. I was like, oh, yeah, this is going to be fun because I haven't done one of these in a while as well. So,
well, that's very cool. As the listeners can hear, you clearly are not a native of Houston, Texas. You are from Ireland. Before we get into talking about the switch up with that, we always love to ask people, what got you interested in the paranormal to begin with?
Oh, man. I always end up dragging out this book just because it's such a handy prop. It's Mysteries of the Unexplained, a Reader's Digest book. Do you have it? This is fantastic. Okay, brilliant.
We got our start on the same thing. I just took the little, they put the little cheap stuff, the cover on the outside, and I like the book to look fancier.
Yeah, I actually did the same thing. This exact copy. So that uncle that I was just talking about, who's coming over next week, we're going on a big road trip, me, him, my dad. He is 10 years older than me. So when I was a kid, obviously his room was like this mecca of 1990s paraphernalia. Like it was the coolest place to be. So I would sneak in and I would read Mysteries of the Unexplained and I'd like steal his like Pearl Jam CDs and stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was honestly like the first kind of thing I think that got me in. And there's a bit in there about like the banshees specifically, the ghosts, not the band. And because it was like so specific to Ireland, I was convinced. I couldn't have been like older than 5 or 6. And I remember going into my mom and dad's room, like I couldn't sleep or whatever. And my mom still to this day is very kind of no nonsense with her parenting. And she was like, well, you're not getting into my bed. You can sleep on the floor.
You're like, Mom, I'm scared.
Yeah. So I camped out on the floor of my mom's room because of Reader's Digest, Mysteries of the Unexplained. So yeah, that was it. And then like X-Files would be on the TV. And then my mom, who was very no nonsense in her parenting, was terrified of everything else. So like we couldn't watch scary movies in the house or anything. So me and my dad would like kind of watch them when she was in bed and like in secret. So the other way around that was like the Simpsons Treehouse of Horrors.
Okay.
All of this stuff, because it was like, oh, you shouldn't be watching this. Now I'm warped and that's all I watch.
Have you had any personal experiences that you would call unexplained?
Yeah, I've had a few, to be honest. None for like almost my entire life until I actually started like taking it a bit more seriously and like looking for it, doing the the quote unquote ghost hunting thing back home. There's a big haunted house on the hill called the Hellfire Club in Dublin. And I always talk about it because it's just like, again, it was one of those places I didn't visit as a kid, but as an adult, when you have like, autonomy and stuff like that, you can just go wherever you want. I would go up there with one of my best friends and his now wife, and she grew up in the area. So she was like telling us stories from when she was like a teenager. She would just walk up there on her own in the middle of the night. And like our biggest fear wasn't the ghosts, it was always the people up there, because there has been some crazy stuff going on just with like kids throwing parties that get out of hand and stuff like that. But yeah, we were lucky enough. A couple of nights we went up and I had the little voice recorder and stuff. We were doing the typical, if there's anyone here, like, talking to this. And we did, in fairness, we got like a few interesting little responses. And then like a few that we learned to kind of debunk, like there's a drip from the ceiling because it's a stone building. That drip, when it hits the water, sounds unbelievably like kill.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it took us it was only the repetition of it that like we actually learned. And it still sounds like that. But yeah. So it was a cool like little intro into what would you even call it? Like audio tricksterism or something? I don't know. But yeah, then we would go up sometimes and there'd be just pigeons roosting in there and they would scare the absolute pants off us. But the last time that I remember going up, me and my friend's wife we were kind of scouting the rooms in the place just to make sure that there was no kids or anything in there. And as we got into the first room we were checking out, something like audibly hissed at us. Like,
oh.
And I'm talking as loud as a cat, like, and we reacted in the most bizarre way because we just went like, did you hear that? Yes, I heard that. And then we checked it out. And like, I think because it was so outlandish, we were like, there has to be something real behind this. And there was no cat. Like we heard this noise in the room. We looked out the window, all that, nothing. And so we decided to like start our, I guess, investigation there in that room. And whatever it was in the house that night, it made us follow it. Like, because as we were in that room, we could hear like footsteps kind of noises on the rock outside. So we were like, okay, let's go out here. So we would go out into the next room and then we would hear stuff in the following room. Anyway, so we were in the last room upstairs and all of a sudden we hear like, it sounded like bowling balls or people like moving furniture on the ground floor.
Uh-huh.
But like, there's so much that doesn't make sense even now. And I've texted my friend's wife multiple times being like, we experienced that, right? Because the ground floor is actually just mud, basically, from like hundreds of years of just debris and silt and stuff like that. So nothing actually makes noise. You know what I mean? Other than the scrape.
It would kind of be, dampened, whatever would hit it.
Exactly. Yeah. But this sounded audibly like someone was dragging furniture from one side of the building to the other or like rolling bowling balls. And so at this point we were like, no, that is kids, like definitely. So we ran downstairs to try and catch these people. And then we ran all around the building trying to because again, we were more afraid of like getting jumped. Yeah, we get outside the building and we're all really agitated with my friend for some reason. He's usually like the kind of the brunt of the jokes anyway. But this time we were actually annoyed with him for no reason. He would just say something like, hey, do you want to go back inside? And he'd be like, Carl, seriously, come on. But yeah, when we were standing outside, then I saw like literally very cliche, big black shadow just crossed one of the windows. But specifically, it had a red eye.
Oh,
that
wow.
I saw. Yeah. And it was like I saw like the side profile as if it was turning away. And it was just enough for me to go like, I'm not going back in there. And so after all that, we kind of we backed away. There's a big rock outside that we kind of I don't know, felt safer standing by the rock for some reason. And as we were there, we were like, oh, this thing, it literally convinced us, it got us out of the building.
Yeah.
And then a few more weird stuff happened that evening because there's kind of two little outhouses. And my friend who didn't really he heard all the noises, but he didn't see anything. And finally, in the end, something he is convinced that something knocked his flashlight out of his hand as we were walking away. And I don't know, were we all in hysterics? Absolutely, yes. But by the time we got back to their house for a cup of tea, his wife, it was January in the mountains in Dublin, so it was cold. She had a leather jacket, hoodies, t-shirts, all padded on, and she still came out with scratches on her ribs.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. Then we definitely brought stuff home with us as well.
Oh, boy.
I don't necessarily believe in attachments or anything. I just think it was this energy came with us or something. And over the course of the 2 or 3 months that we had been going up and down, my parents' house where I was staying at the time, that became pretty active. And all of us were we were in the house. It was my going away party. That's what it was. The night before I left, we had a party. And the night before the party was the last time we went up to the Hellfire and experienced all this. And so it was the end of the party. I don't drink. Everybody else was kind of like definitely not drunk, like, you know what I mean? But everybody had a good time. But it ended up just being the people who were in the Hellfire Club were the last ones left at the party. I was going to give them a lift home. As we're sitting there talking, there was like a bag full of beer cans at the other end of the dining room kitchen. And like it just moved on its own. And the only other person who was there was my other friend's husband. And he is very skeptic, not really into any of this stuff. He just kind of entertains us. But we all just looked at the bag and then just looked back at each other and we're like, yeah. And then just continued on. So
it was just trying to help clean up.
I mean, hopefully. Honestly, it was one of the most bizarre times though. So yeah, sorry, it's a very long-winded way. That's the most like black and white. This is something that happened and I can't explain it. And it's kind of tropey a little bit, a lot of it. But I guess like there's a reason why these things are stereotypical, you know?
Yeah, they say things are a trope, but if there's some truth behind it, what I love about how you started that off is I'll have people who say, aren't you afraid to go into these cemeteries that are haunted and such? You know, you might run into a ghost. And I'm always like, I'm more worried about getting mugged, you know, if it's late at night or something.
Yeah.
So I totally get, you know, well, we're kind of cautious about going there. So yeah, of course, initially you're going to be like, something is fooling with us. It's probably some kids pulling a prank or something. And then you find out, no, it's not a couple of kids pulling a prank. It's a red-eyed shadow thing that was pulling the prank, really. That is so amazing to have something like that happen because not only does it show some kind of intelligence, because it clearly was trying to get you guys out of the building, but some really interesting intelligence. It's not just responding to your questions. It's actually trying to manipulate you guys to get you to go somewhere and then watches you to see if you went out and turns away once it's like, okay, I got him out of the building. See ya.
Yeah. And like, obviously at the time, I don't think I was really thinking very like logically. I was, you know, scared. But since then, I've had like a lot of time to kind of think back on it. And now I'm convinced that we have like haunted the building. I don't, you know what I mean? Like the people as like a collective, because there is all these like lovely ghost stories from it. And like in doing some like reading on the history, and one of my friends who came with us that night, she's a practicing witch, but she's also a historian. We had her on like in the very early days of Weekly Creep, and we went through the history of the Hellfire and we all told these stories that we had. Yeah, at the end of it, I still was just like, no, I think this is just a haunted house on the hill that we're all afraid of. And whatever is in there was obviously just fed up that night, was like, no, get out. Because we've been there other nights and literally nothing has happened.
Sure.
You know?
This was ticked off that particular night.
Yeah, yeah.
Anytime people ask me, if you have a bucket list, where would you want to go? I always am saying an Irish castle. The folklore that is over in Ireland is just amazing. And we have a unique opportunity here with you because you're from Ireland, obviously, and now you've come to Houston. For you, what is the difference or maybe some similarities too between Irish folklore and some of the American folklore, and specifically even maybe some of the Texas folklore?
When I first moved here, I really didn't know what to expect. I came here because my wife is from here. And when we met, I was living in Canada. And at the time, it was like, okay, well, I can either pursue this, like extending visas up there, or we can start working on me getting here and getting married and all that kind of thing. So obviously, that's the route we took. And I had lived in Toronto. That was my first like big city experience. But I wasn't like actively doing stuff like this at the time. So it was different. When I came here, I would start to hear stories like there's a place downtown. It's the Spaghetti Warehouse. It was the old name of it. Now it's a pub. It's actually an Irish pub. A genuine Irish pub as well, owned by Irish people.
That's cool.
Yeah, so you would hear stories about like that, and another bar downtown called the Carafe, where, you know, oh, there was a girl who ran along the top and she fell off. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Like, that's a really interesting story. But it's also very similar to the Madame LaLaurie house in New Orleans, you know? And so and I'm not saying like, oh, I've read so much or anything like that, but I would start to see like similar stories coming out from like the same places.
Sure.
And specifically when we did the Hellfire Club, I was reading that and there's a story there where, like, you know, the devil comes to play cards one night. Because originally that's what the Hellfire Club specifically was, just kind of a gambling den and a hut of debauchery for all these rich men. Anyway, the devil supposedly shows up one night and he's playing cards and he drops a card. Someone else drops a card on the ground, and when they bend down to pick it up, they see that this man has hooves. And then they look up and they go, oh my God, this is the devil. And he either jumps into the fire, pushes a waitress or a maid into the fire, and then jumps out the window, or he shoots out through the roof. There's a bunch of different like endings to it. But then I found that exact same story in, I can't think of the name right now, Loftus Hall. I have a cup up there with it.
Yep.
Loftus Hall in Wexford. And that's only nowadays, like, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half's drive from the Hellfire Club. And then I was reading about another big house that I had actually never heard of. And it's in Dublin as well. Like it's just, I guess it was turned into an asylum or something at some stage. But that has, again, the same story, different variations. It's really frustrating, to be honest, as well, because when you try and like get to the bottom of these stories, you're like, oh, there's nothing here. You know what I mean? Like nothing in writing saying like, this is the ghost of, such and such. So now I've come to find in Houston specifically, because I'm actually out like chasing these stories, and I'll go from one place to a next, and I'll get to say O'Driscoll's bar on the corner, and I'll go in and I'll be like, hey, such and such from this place told me that you guys have a ghost, or whatever the case may be. And they'll go, no, I don't think so, but this place has a ghost. And they're like, it'd be 2 miles down the road. And so I literally have found myself doing this kind of daisy chain of like, but wait, where is the story coming from? I'll be talking to people who work in these buildings, and everybody knows another building that has a ghost story, but nobody seems to be in the one with the ghost story, that kind of way. So sorry, yeah, this probably, again, doesn't really answer the question, I suppose, but it's just like this ongoing chase of like, where did the stories actually come from? And then I personally love seeing the same story in different things, because then you can follow the people with it, right?
Exactly. They came over as people came over. They brought their stories with them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then there's like, I've been lucky enough for, season 2 of Houston Strange. I've been working with people in Galveston down by the beach. Really nice ladies. They do like tours down there. So I've been lucky enough now to be in 2 of the kind of more haunted buildings to do the interviews or whatever. I'm not like investigating or anything, but you can actually see the source of some of these stories now. And still some of them are like, what's the word? Unsubstantiated. One building in particular, there's who they call the old school ma'am. And she's from the 1900s storm, which was still to this day one of the most catastrophic, if not the most catastrophic natural disaster, I think, in North America. But anyway, this lady was being washed down the road. The water was so high, it was up to the 2nd story on these buildings. And she smashes into one of the windows of this Hutchins Seeley building, it was called. She manages to get herself inside, finds some rope for whatever reason. There was just a lot of rope back in the day, I guess. Ties the rope around herself, jumps into the water and starts saving people. And this is on record, like a whole bunch of people were saved, physically dragged in the window by this lady or other people that she had gone on to save. And then at the end of the night, this woman, like finally the water recedes and they've dragged all of these bodies up to the 3rd floor, which is where I was doing the interview. I didn't know that at the time. And then at the end of the night, she literally just drifts off into a coma and never wakes up. 2 weeks go by before she actually passes away. And the people that I was interviewing, like, are actual historians. They've, lived on the island. They've been, one of the libraries in town has actual voice recordings of survivors of this storm. Nobody got this woman's name.
Oh, man.
So even just the moniker of the old school ma'am is just, they're assuming things. And people know this, but they're like, but at the end of the day, we have this record of this one woman saving all of these people, whoever she was. And now they see a woman who they think is her in the building, like quite often by the sounds of things. Yeah.
I had asked Adam if one of the women that he had been talking to was my good friend Kathleen Shanahan-Maka, who's been on the podcast a couple of times. She actually was on a Paranormal Conversation with us as well. And he said no. But I wanted to know a little bit more about the story that he was telling here. And I have Kathleen's Ghosts of Galveston book. And the building that he is referencing is the Hutchins Seeley building. And Kathleen writes, the preeminent 19th century architect Nicholas Clayton designed this pair of 3-story buildings to appear as if they are one. The narrow Ball, Hutchins and Company bank building on the corner and the John Seeley office building next door are an impressive sign of the wealth that was once part of the Wall Street of the South. I thought that was interesting. We just did an episode on Haunted Wall Street. Built in 1895 of gray and pink granites, red Texas sandstone, and buff-colored terracotta, they were restored to their former grandeur in 1985. A shield on the west facade is emblazoned with the 1895 erection date, and the firm's founding year of 1854 appears below it. Looking through the glass doors on the Strand side, And the Strand is just this historic district in Galveston. Visitors can see an ornate wrought iron and slate staircase ascending toward a skylight between the two buildings. It's on this staircase that the woman in white is often seen, although she has appeared in many parts of the two buildings. She is the ghost of a heroic schoolteacher whom locals have named Sarah because her true identity has been lost. During the 1900 hurricane, Sarah and others took shelter in these massive buildings. As the storm surge rose along the Strand to 17 feet, the people climbed to the top floors. Witnesses from the disaster relate the story that the brave teacher selflessly climbed through a window, balanced on the ledge, and grabbed people as they floated by in the floodwaters, pulling them inside. Those victims who were already dead were put on one side of the room, and the living were laid on the other. She stayed in the building for several days, caring for the sick and injured until she herself succumbed to the disease epidemic that followed the storm. Apparently, there's not much on the third floor of the building anymore, but employees refuse to go there because they feel they are being watched. The whispering sounds on the stairs contribute to their uneasiness. A visit to the second floor restroom used by employees and customers can occasionally be unsettling, as stall doors have been seen and felt to shake and pound violently. Heavy footsteps have been heard walking and running on the hard floors near the area as well. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. You mentioned Weekly Creep, which is also another one of the podcasts that you do. What got you started in, what made you go, oh, yeah, I think I'd like to start a podcast and do the Weekly Creep? And then, of course, that's grown into Houston Strange as well.
So when I moved here, we did everything like by the book. We're still doing everything by the book, which is why I'm still awaiting my citizenship papers and stuff like that. But I moved in January 2020. And so applying for the paperwork and all that, it just got delayed. So it was a good 16, 18 months where I just wasn't allowed to work. I was sitting here doing laundry and making dinners and stuff like that. Then I can't even remember. I play music as well, very badly. But I was like, oh, I'm going to get a microphone and start trying to do this seriously while I have time. And then obviously I learned very fast that I'm not a good composer. But now I had this microphone that I needed to use. So we were always into ghosts, me and Dulce, my wife. Yeah, we just started. We were like, hey, this seems like a cool idea. By this stage, I think it was 2021. Yeah, I was an electrician by trade, and I had never had the opportunity to really work with stuff like this. So learning this, and even the smallest of things, just making it a little bit better probably not every episode, but every few episodes, you see yourself getting a little bit better, whether it's storytelling or the actual editing aspect of it or something. I really, really love it, to the point where I was probably saying this on that call that we had before. My successes aren't monetary or the size of the audience, but it's the small wins. Next week on this road trip that me and my dad are going on, I'll be meeting one of our listeners, who's been listening for 4 years up in Denver. So yeah, it's small stuff like that I love. Through that, then I also kind of backwards engineered myself into just finding an affinity for camera gear and all of the expensive stuff that I don't need. I love learning how it works. But now, even up until last night, we actually have a home movie channel on YouTube. And it started because of Weekly Creep. And now we just have all these random videos and vlog style videos. But it's got a lot of our family members who've already passed away. And say my niece, when she was first born, I have me meeting her in the airport for the first time. And she had actually just gone to the toilet in her diaper. And she had completely destroyed the onesie that she was wearing. But so stuff like that, now we have that on camera. And I was just going through it last night and I was like, no, this is really, really special. So again, long-winded answer, but yeah, that's why I'm into this. And I'm just constantly trying to think of a new way to make it practical. Another friend of mine, I'm trying to do a non-spooky documentary series, hopefully later on this year, with a friend of mine who is an actual filmmaker. And whether it's good or bad, I don't know, but it's just really nice to be in that kind of more creative space. I drive a forklift for 40 hours a week as well, you know what I mean? So,
you're I need something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
What Adam was referencing there was a group of us that are paranormal podcasters or unexplained stuff kind of podcasters, and we'd gotten together to do a little social thing on Zoom. And one of the things that I had commented about on there was how important it is to have that community. Because, yeah, you might get really successful and have millions and millions of downloads and make a lot of money with podcasting, but that's really a rarity. And so I'm like, I've always told people who are getting into podcasting, number one, make sure it's a topic that you enjoy and that you would do no matter what. And then, focus on the community, because meeting the people in person is just so amazing. And, a lot of them consider us their friends because we're in their ears all the time. And so they're like, I feel like I know you. And so for us, we don't really get that opportunity because we're talking to them. And so it's neat to be able to get to actually talk to real people too. It's such a fun thing.
And interact. And that was the thing, as cheesy as it sounds, when I started Houston Strange, last year we had a couple of deaths in the family, and we ended up traveling back home 3 times in a couple of months. And it was just disastrous for scheduling and stuff like that. So that's where Weekly Creep kind of went by the wayside a little, just because we didn't have the time to dedicate to it.
Mm-hmm.
We also had started coming up with plans to maybe get out of Houston or go back home potentially. Obviously, we're still working on those plans. But I was like, what? I haven't given Houston a fair kind of shot, you know what I mean? Because I had spent so much time back in Dublin, and everywhere I went, I would just be talking to people, whether I knew them or not. I remember standing, and it's, again, so cheesy. I was standing on Grafton Street in the middle of town in Dublin, just watching a guy busking. And I think Dulce was in buying makeup in one of the shops. So I was just standing there. It was raining. This guy was giving it his absolute all, but he was really bad. Oh, God love him. But he was trying so hard. So obviously we gave him whatever we had in our pockets. But I was just chatting to this fella beside me for 5-10 minutes. And then at the end, it was all right, see you later. Never had seen him before or again. So I was why don't we have that in Houston? Dulce's been here her whole life, and I've been here 5 years now. But over the last year, because of Houston Strange specifically, it actually has gotten to the point now where if I go to the grocery store, I might bump into somebody that I know. I was at work one day and I met a guy who owned a bar who I only knew because of Houston Strange. We went to this oddities exposition 2 weeks ago, me and Dulce. And we were walking in and I was like, I don't know what to expect of this thing. It might be kind of hokey. And then there in the corner was this girl who I had met at another event because of Houston Strange. And so we ended up chatting and hitting it off. And now her and my wife were exchanging stuff. It was great. So that's already there's that little sense of community. One of the episodes that we did, two episodes, Ravenwolf Manor. It was this guy who had been a Houston legend before I moved here. And unfortunately, the year before I moved here, his store burned down. He was a victim of an arson attack. And his store was the safe space for a lot of weirdos, me included. That's where we would go, get out of the heat and just look at bizarre stuff. It was taxidermy and oddities and curiosities and stuff like that. And so I reached out to him. I was like, hey, I'm trying this new project. Would you mind giving me some of your time? We spent 8 hours with him that first day. He has a house now, Ravenwolf Manor. It's just an hour outside Houston. And after we left that day, he invited us back. He was having a party the next week. And then just 2 weeks ago on our 5th wedding anniversary, we actually spent the night in his house because he was having a Valentine's Day party. And because of the podcast, I already knew, a lot of other people knew me just from being there. So after the burlesque dancers and stuff had wrapped up for the night, me and my wife were all right, maybe we'll just go to bed now. And then we ended up hanging around for 3 hours. It was 2 a.m. when everybody left and we actually went to bed. But so that sense of community is already building, which is lovely, I think.
Well, I love that you got to stay at that place because you are a wonderful storyteller. Oh. I love that you cover unique things that other people haven't heard of because, there's paranormal podcasts now are a dime a dozen. And so when I find something that's something I've never heard about, and that Ravenwolf Manor, wow, maybe you could share a little bit about it.
First, there was and also thank you. Sorry, I'm actually really bad at hearing nice things like that. So thank you very much. Navasota is where Ravenwolf is. And Lawyer, he was just such a character anyway. And he was so generous with his time. And so when we were talking, he was like, I don't think you guys are going to find this interesting. My stories are pretty boring. And we were chatting for a good solid hour, an hour and a half. And then all of a sudden he starts telling us the stories of his childhood and where that came about. And he was I guess a lot of experiencers, you kind of remove yourself from the experience. You forget how it feels in the moment. And then when he started telling the stories, you could see like the emotion coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a lot of like remembering for him that he didn't, like these memories that he had forgotten. And all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, like you could see the realization, like as he was telling the story, it was like, I can't believe we did that. Or, his sisters with the Ouija board and stuff. Yeah, it was just, and all I could think about was that I had messed up the frame rate on the camera in the video. So because I'd been doing slow motion to get some B-roll in the when he was giving us the tour of the house. But yeah, like I'm really starting to just appreciate the actual history of this area, which is so easily forgotten because like they put up apartment blocks in like 2 months flat here, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And it's just one frame. Yeah. So it's really difficult to appreciate it until you're actually in the middle of it.
There's this other location that you cover, the Black Hope Cemetery, which was actually featured in an Unsolved Mysteries back in the day on season 12, episode 7.
Tonight on Unsolved Mysteries.
2 families move into an idyllic suburb only to discover that their homes lie on top of an abandoned graveyard. Soon they are tormented by strange phenomena and threatening apparitions and are driven into a state of complete terror. Are the spirits of the dead seeking vengeance on the living for the desecration of their graves?
And the Black Hope Cemetery was this old 19th century African-American cemetery, which was later covered by a housing subdivision, and then there was all this poltergeist activity that started happening. And the reason this probably happened is because many of the people who were buried here were former slaves.
Black Hope was the first one that I had done, and I found that because of Weekly Creep. And Black Hope in Houston is kind of, a lot of people do know about it, to the point where the residents up there are actually like really anti-ghost people, because these crews will come up, like ghost hunting crews, and like try and fix their problem and stuff like that. But yeah, so as far as the history goes, the guys up at in Crosby at the Black Hope Cemetery, they're the ones that are having like poltergeist activity. And I actually just met up with, just today I put out like an update episode. It was nice and short, but I met up with Mike from Black Hope, who's been experiencing all the stuff. And like me and him now have known each other for a year. Like that's how long it was taken, because I had to like gain his trust. Like he's let me in his house with his kids and so, you know what I mean? So it was more than just like, hey, tell me your ghost story. So like, yeah, over the course of the year, then I met like his wife and his neighbor who's also experiencing stuff. But this is the tricky thing, is the neighbor who is also experiencing stuff, her husband is very, very Christian and flat out does not believe that she is experiencing this stuff. So she actually can't talk about it while he's around. Like that one interview that we did, it was when he was away on business. It all felt so sketchy, and Mike like had to orchestrate the whole thing. We got into the house for a couple of hours. She told this unbelievable story. I felt so bad for her, because I was like, it's okay. Like these guys are literally experiencing the same thing. And like, so are these people and these people. Like you're not on your own. But it's the isolation that you read in so many of the like kind of classic cases, where I think this is the scariest part of a lot of the stories. Like Mike and Susan are having a great time now. They're over the scaredness thing. Yeah, like every now and then they'll walk out to the kitchen and they might see someone and they'll get a fright. But then they have the adrenaline of it, and they go back and they tell each other, or they call me and they're like, oh my God, like I just saw this or that. Whereas Michelle, it's not that way for her. You know what I mean? She's very much on her own with it. But this is a perfect example of a story that can be debunked, because like this Black Hope Cemetery, there's no like real records of it, stuff like that when I read into it. But it doesn't deny the fact that all of these people are still experiencing stuff.
So something is there.
Something is there. And so I was looking at the property plans from like the 1850s, back in the time when Black Hope was supposed to have originated, that cemetery. And there's no like markings on it. It was all like private land and stuff off the top of my head. But there was a lot of Swedish farmers. For some reason, there was like a big Swedish and Irish population there. And they would have buried their family on their own land, which was perfectly legal back then.
Yeah.
And as well as that, the girls down in Galveston also told me that that was a huge Native American area for like obviously thousands of years, which is something that I wouldn't have known because I didn't go to school here. But she was able, one of the girls specifically was able to tell me like, yeah, it was, this tribe, that tribe were big in this particular area. Mm-hmm. So like, who knows? There are definitely still bodies being found in people's back gardens as recently as I think 2019. So maybe like this very romantic story that's built up around it, that only happened to come out after the Unsolved Mysteries episode aired.
Sure.
Maybe that's not true, but the end result is still these families experiencing wild stuff. And unfortunately, there are investigative teams still trying to get in and like fix the problem to this day. And it's just like wreaking havoc, basically.
Sure. They're probably just kicking it up. It is so sad when you have a woman, that, and this happens a lot, where it seems like the female spouse is having these experiences and the male spouse is like, nope, I'm not experiencing anything. You must just be imagining things. And it would feel very isolating that you don't have this other person that's having these same kind of experiences. And it's not like, just, the cupboard opened up on its own. It's stuff that's really scary. And you can only imagine what that's like. And it really bothers me when somebody is like, well, I'm a Christian, so I don't believe in that stuff. And I'm like, well, for me personally, I think the Bible's the most supernatural book out there. And it's got all kinds of crazy stuff in it. So, and if you believe in having a life after this, well, that's a spirit. So where are those spirits going to and that kind of thing? So I just don't understand that thinking.
I live in Texas. I'm not allowed to talk about the Bible, but no, but it is very much like this pick and choose kind of thing. But and I'm also guilty. Like anytime, I think sometime last year, Dulce woke me up and she was checking outside and she was like, "There's someone in the house." Like, what are you talking about? She had woken up because she heard someone in high heels walking through our living room, and we have we live in a small house, so like we can literally look into our living room from our bed. And I was terrified. So I was like, no, you just dreamt it. Go back to sleep. I'm so guilty of being that husband as well. I try not to be, but it's like a natural instinct where I'm like, no. There's no such thing as ghosts. But in a really classic case is the Harrisburg haunting, the Conjuring, the Perrin family haunting. That's what I'm trying to think of. If you read Andrea Perrin's books, there's a lot of words, but a huge part of that is just the wife is experiencing stuff, the husband is just ignoring it. Mm-hmm. And as Michelle was telling me, some of the stuff that she had experienced, it was quite literally like she'd wake up and she'd like see a shadow in her room standing over her husband. And of course, when she would react and he would wake up, he didn't see it.
Sure.
So it's almost like this taunting kind of thing. It's really weird. I'll also say, like, if you're looking for answers, I don't have them. I'm just here to tell you the stories and give you maybe like a best guess, but it's fascinating. And that particular case kind of like, to go back to what we were saying earlier, like kind of just checks off so many of the classic like symptoms that you read about in like some of the more popular cases,
Yeah. And it's interesting that you put it that way because it does almost make you wonder when you have a lot of conflict in a house, sometimes that seems to stir up some more of the poltergeist activity. And now it makes you wonder, is it the poltergeist activity stirring itself up to make there be more conflict in the house, or which is like the chicken and the egg, which came first?
Yeah, and that's the other thing as well that I always try and tell people, because I have had experiences that I sound like an absolute lunatic when I'm retelling them because of how bizarre they are. But when other people are telling me their stories, and that, like, you can tell that they're self-conscious, and it's like, well, look, whether you saw this because you had a row with your husband and like, the tension was up, or whether this thing caused the row, it doesn't matter. Like, it swings and roundabouts, you know what I mean? You still had this horrible experience. And so maybe if the relationship was more calm, so would the house. Who knows?
None of us have any answers, of course, but if someone was to come up to you and say, "What is a ghost?" what is a response that you usually give?
I've started just telling people I don't believe in ghosts, to be honest. I think there's so many different options. Like, I love the idea. I think the most stereotypical thing about my family, being an Irish family, is that like growing up, if there was something weird, or like if something good happened, say, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I found 10 euros on the ground today, whatever. Straight away, your mom or your granny or someone would go, oh, that's because your uncle such and such or your granddad's looking out for you. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So there's very much that kind of crossover of like ancestral beliefs and like, what's the Christian, like guardian angels?
Oh, sure.
It's kind of like a mismatch of that. So I love the idea of, you know, oh, that's just your cousin, or, you know, such and such coming to say hello or wishing you well, keeping an eye on you. I also love the idea of like just the very black and white, like stone tape. Like this was just a replay of something that happened years and years ago. And it is what it is. We don't know how to fix it. It might stop, it might not.
Mm-hmm. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
And then the poltergeist stuff is where it gets really interesting, because I genuinely think a lot of the time it is something that we are like doing. But just real quick as well, one of my favorite stories that I've ever heard, it was on Jim Harold's Campfire. And I don't know what episode it was, but it was somebody who had lived in a house where a victim of Ted Bundy's had lived before.
Okay.
And this person reported seeing the ghost of Ted Bundy while Ted Bundy was still alive.
Oh.
And yeah, and so obviously that was like just a really famous person that they were able to identify and go, like, oh my God, this is who it was. But now I've heard like other stories similar to that, like whether it was doppelganger like instances or like almost time slip kind of stuff. And that they're the stories that really, really intrigue me. I'm like, living ghosts is what I literally have a folder called Living Ghosts, because I'm finding it really difficult to find like more stories, but every now and then you'll hear someone will tell a story and you're like, that's exactly what I'm looking for here. You know what I mean? And it is this living ghost weird phenomena. So that's the one that really gets to me. I'm like, how does this happen?
I literally just watched the movie Just Like Heaven from years ago that has Reese Witherspoon and Mark Ruffalo, and in it she's in a coma, and yet her spirit, he's like rented out her condo because her family, she's been in a coma for so long. They're like, well, we got to, do something with her condo. So he rents her condo and she starts, quote unquote, haunting him there. But she's alive and in a coma over there, which totally is just like what you're describing there is, can people's spirits, I mean, we know people can have these out of body experiences and stuff. Yeah. So is that something that's happening? Is that person having an out of body experience? Or is it that energy, like the stone tape, something very negative has happened here with, say, Ted Bundy? So is that just something that's locked in there and it's not even Ted Bundy or his spirit? It's just that action that happened there. And I'm really starting to lean more towards, when you look at some of these unexplained things that involve some kind of a spirit or something, more of that time, space continuum overlap, because we don't understand dimensions. We don't know how many dimensions are out there. They talk about parallel worlds and existence. Is there another Adam out there somewhere and another Diane out there that are having some other kind of life experience? And then every so often we cross over each other. And is that why we get the Mandela effect? Because all of a sudden the timelines have crossed each other or something weird has happened. So that stuff is, I agree with you, so much more intriguing to me than just, oh, that's my dead aunt who's come back to say hi. Because it's like, how is that happening? And if it has some kind of an intelligence and a reaction, not just the, repetitious overplaying of, say, the Battle of Gettysburg, continuing to fight their battle. But like, if those soldiers like looked over at you and were like, look at that dude over there in the, jeans and shirt that doesn't look like a uniform. What's he doing over there? That is just like, wow, what in the world is that? And so I agree with you.
I genuinely don't think we're ever going to have these answers, but the weirder stuff you get into, the more open you start like becoming. And you kind of get to a place where you're like, I can't do this. I need to back up. You know what I mean? Like, just give me a scary ghost. Yeah. Just give me a scary ghost and let me be done with it. But yeah, because even the one of the people that I was in the Hellfire Club with, the witch that we're friends with, she has seen her husband in her house, but he has done like, how do I even describe this? Like, it was a doppelganger, okay, but it was acting in a strange way.
So it wasn't an exact copy of him.
Yeah, like when she saw it the one time that sticks out to me was the way their kitchen is really like long, like kitchen dining room, and then there's a hallway going up to the front door. And she was just walking down here and glanced up in the hallway and she saw him like sitting crisscross applesauce, hunched over just in the middle of the hallway. It was like really unsettling, I thought. But I was like, and then of course, either he wasn't there or he was at his desk upstairs. It was something like that. But she's seen him like a couple of times in these weird kind of situations. So that's one of those. It's like, is this a doppelganger? Is it the shadow self? I don't know.
Exactly. And that's what makes it more creepy and scary, because you're like, I really don't understand that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I had a really interesting conversation with one of the girls at work. Turns out she's been listening to Weekly Creep for like a long time, and now Houston Strange. So it was, again, just one of those really nice moments where she knew me, I didn't know her. You know what I mean? And so when we finally were introduced, it was like we had known each other for years. But she's of Islamic faith. And so her main thing that she is like, she loves the jinn fairy connection, but she's also she's got such a better education with the jinn and stuff. Like, they're not this big scary thing that like the Westerners have been taught to base, because
everything's negative about them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I'm struggling with my words with that. But yeah, so she was explaining that like one of the beliefs there is that when we're born, so is a shadow version or a jinn of us, and it's like a perfect copy. It grows with us, learns with us, but it's always there. We just don't necessarily see it.
Wow, that's like mind blowing. It's almost like, we talk about, you mentioned guardian angels in Christianity before, but what if that's like what that is? It's not really this guardian angel that's been with you your whole life. It's you that's been with you, but it's like some other essence about you. That's mind blowing.
Yeah, and so again, not to harp on, but in the update episode of Houston Strange, when me and Mike sat down, he was telling me, we were literally sitting in a burger shop, and he was telling me this. He is starting to experience things now where, like, say at 6 o'clock in the morning when he's supposed to get up, someone wakes him up, but it's not his wife. Like, he's had like doors opening. Occasionally they'll sleep in separate rooms. The wife will sleep with the daughter and he'll sleep with the son. It's just the way it works out. And like, the son's toys might activate, but it's at the time when he's supposed to get up and go to work. We had this conversation where I was like, because I do definitely think that there is a doppelganger. He's got pictures of someone's feet on the other side of the door. Like, I tried to not make it like sound more than what it was, but like the feet beneath the door thing from the episode, that was his daughter. I'm convinced it was, but I don't think it was her in physical form. You know what I mean? And it sounds so crazy. Because it was the day after I spoke with Nora about this shadow jinn entity. I met with Mike that evening and I was telling him, and I was just like, dude, this literally sounds like what you're kind of dealing with to a certain extent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
would you tell the listeners a little bit about the Houston Heights Batman?
Oh, absolutely. I love the Houston Heights Batman. I think he's my favorite thing. I want to do like a cheesy TikTok about him, but I just need to go downtown. To the Heights. So yeah, I hold on. Let me just see if I can. I had the newspaper articles saved on my desktop. Let me see if it's
I was
here.
so intrigued by that story. I think it goes back to the 50s or something. And I was like, what in the world?
One of the things that intrigues me the most about Houston is like people genuinely don't know. Like, I'm a big like true crime fan as well. Fan, it's such an awkward word. I'm very interested in true crime. So I had known all about like Dean Corll and this horrific story, which also took place in the Houston Heights, but not until the 70s, I think. There was 2 serial killers in Houston at different times. Both had the name the Candyman, but Dean Corll was the one that I was familiar with. It was all around this fairly small area called the Heights. And I would tell this story to other people who had grown up here at that time, and they never heard of this like dangerous criminal who was on the loose at that time. And so when I found the Houston Heights Batman, I was like, hold on, does anybody else know about this? This couple were sitting outside their apartment building one evening, and for some reason they were having a few beers. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and they were sitting with their landlord's daughter, who was definitely underage. I think she was only 14 or 15. I'm choosing to believe that it was purely innocent, that she was just waiting for her mom to come home from work, because she was on her way home from work. The landlady was a cleaner as well, I think, at like a local bar. So they're sitting outside. It's a hot, humid Houston evening, and all of a sudden something grabs their attention, and they look up in this tree, and there is what they describe as Batman. I think they said he looked like he was around 6.5 foot tall. He had a cape, as far as I can remember, and he was just dressed in all black. And I think he had a mask on. I'm assuming he did, but they could tell that he was white, though. He's a white man. And I talk about this in other things before because it's that thing that just draws our attention, even though we don't necessarily hear anything. It's just something goes, look over here, you know? And so that's what happened to him. And at the same time, there was an older gentleman in his bed in the apartment building. And he says that he just woke up, looked out the window and saw this Batman sitting in the tree. But I guess he just thought it was like some crazy man. I don't know. So he just kind of rolled over and went back to sleep. But then the next thing that happened was a flame shot out of the back of the Batman, described as like a paintbrush, like a perfect like jet flame. And he just shot off into the sky. The couple and their teenage friend were just kind of in awe of what had happened. But then the mom had been coming back home. The landlady had been walking down the road and she just saw this thing taken off out of the tree. And they were able to follow it. Like it didn't just disappear. It flew and they followed it until the flame was so far away that it vanished.
I mean, it's just so crazy because you're like, first of all, you got to go back. This is in the 50s. So nowadays you'd probably be like, oh, somebody fooling around with a jetpack or something up there. But in the 50s,
Right.
It's not like somebody would just have a jetpack hanging out. And so you're like, was that alien? Was it just somebody fooling around? What in the world? That's the craziest story. And to have it witnessed like that. And like you said, it's almost interesting how his energy almost seemed to pull attention to him. Like they look and see him. And then the guy's up in his bed and he looks out and sees him. It's just, how did that all work that way? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I was like, okay, well, it's still like an easy enough case to kind of just forget about. Like, okay, yeah, maybe these people just decided to make up a funny story. But the guys at, I think the Moth Boys podcast, they found a story from not specifically Houston, but it's the NASA center. I think it's the Johnson Space Center. I can't remember, but it's the local space center. Mm-hmm. So the Houston, we have a problem people, I think. Yeah. One of their like engineers, somebody that worked for NASA specifically, was like leaving his office one night and he walked out into the car park and he claims to have seen what he said was a gargoyle.
Wow.
That's what he described it as, like a living gargoyle. I'm not overly familiar with that story just because it's been a while since I read through it, but he saw it more than once. And he got home and I think it was his daughter that ended up reporting it like years later because he was so scared. He was like, what did I just witness? I'm going to lose my job if I tell people about this. They're going to think I'm crazy. But then he went on to witness it a few more times. And so like the Houston gargoyle happened really, like if this thing could fly, it happened very close to the Houston Heights Batman. So I'm like, who knows? Like maybe this was just a person testing new gear for NASA. Like,
yeah.
You know?
Or if you really want to get crazy with some of that stuff, we know that when they started playing around with atomic energy and nuclear stuff, we started having more of these like UFO sightings and stuff. It's almost like they were coming by and going, don't blow yourselves up. So was this dude hanging out where they're making rockets and everything and going, don't blow it up, you know?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of like, and then the other explanation that I've heard is that they like opened some sort of portal.
Well, that's, you never know.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, I've seen some interesting stuff around here that I can't explain. So,
yeah, I'm an open-minded skeptic, but I just love to leave my mind open to the possibilities. Yeah. I think most things have some kind of explanation to them, but especially if you have a guy who obviously he's intelligent, it's multiple experiences. So it's not just one night. Maybe he was a little overly tired or had a little something to drink before or whatever was seeing things. So it's like, if he's having a repetitive experience and it's intense enough that he knows if he tells people about this, they're going to be like, no, we can't have somebody who's supposed to be like an engineer or whatever, having these lunatic kind of ideas going through their head.
Yeah.
And
this is a spoiler for my season 2, which I don't even know when the season 2 is going to come out because my biggest struggle right now is trying to actually just get stories. But I was supposed to go Bigfoot hunting in San Antonio. And I was really excited because I love the idea of Bigfoot. And I just thought it would bring like a nice like spice to the Houston Strange kind of series. Unfortunately, those plans didn't work out. So I was like, okay, well, what can I do now that I have 2 days that I have no plans for? I'm definitely not going to clean the toilet. So I better like get out of the house. I did. I cleaned the bathroom. But no, so there was a case in the 80s called the Cash Landrum UFO incident. And it took place like not far from here. I think it's 45 minutes away. And so I ended up, I remember reading about it in Hunt for the Skinwalker by Colin Kelleher, which is just kind of like the original definitive Skinwalker Ranch book. Very good book. I remember reading this one little snippet and it happened here in just outside of Houston. And I was like, oh, how interesting. And so I looked back into it recently. And so this grandmother, her grandson and her friend, they were out looking for somewhere to play bingo one night. And the story kind of didn't make sense to me because it was like, why are they so far from their home? They were about like 40 minutes away from their house. But they had actually gone on a loop of all of the bingo halls and every single one was closed because it was like Christmas Eve or like the day after Christmas, something like that. And so they were making their way back, very disappointed with their lack of bingo. And all of a sudden, this bright light shone in the sky above them, and it was this unidentified flying object. The friend of the grandmother was again another Christian believer, so she just assumed like a switch flipped, and she went, "This is Jesus, and this is the second coming, and I'm here for it." So she like gets out of the car. She's like, "Take me now," and
no, you don't want them to take you. It's an anal probe.
Yeah. So the grandmother gets out and she's like, what's going on? The kid, I can't remember if the kid actually got out or if he just saw it while sitting in the back of the car. She convinces the friend to get back in the car and they sit there, and then all of a sudden these helicopters come flying over and they like seem to escort this thing away, like back towards, I can't remember the direction they were going in now, but I think they were able to loosely say, well, it was heading towards the airport. So it was, whatever. But these people ended up getting like radiation sickness. They had like pink eye, which is like a really common UFO experience symptom. And ultimately they died like years later from like cancers and stuff. And some people tried to blame that on the UFO. Like, who knows? They could have smoked all their life. But I was like, okay, I need to find where this actually took place, because last year I was working this job building like explosion proof buildings for like oil rigs and stuff. Horrible job. We were outside all the time and I'm just not built for it. But I was working with this older guy who I call Uncle Carl because, he's cool. He's definitely kind of warped. But he grew up here in Denton or Dayton. I can't remember. I always get it mixed up. But in this town where the thing took place, in the 50s, he grew up. And I was like, hey, did you ever hear this? And he's like, no. I don't believe in any of that. So I was like, okay. And then months later, he was like, I was in high school with a kid and his brother says that he saw something weird in the sky one night. He ended up being really sick, man. And I was like, dude, this is the story that I was talking to you about. And he was like, no. And he's like real text. And he's like, oh, I'm telling you now, brother. But he was like telling me this story. And I was like, dude, this is him. Like, this is the story that I read about. So anyway, I looked up on the maps, I found the stretch of road and I was like, this can't be it. The road, because in the description, I was on like NICAP website, like looking at the original incident reports and stuff like that. And it turns out they renamed the road. So I've managed to trace the road back to roughly where I think it took place. And again, I sound like a lunatic, but the reason why I lost the road is because they changed the name from Farm to Market 1485 to what is it? Oh, it's gone from my mind. It's from the town that they were coming from. Let's say it was Roslyn. It's the Roslyn to Crosby Road. And Crosby is where Black Hope is.
Oh, wow.
So I was like sitting here and I had one of those moments where I was like, this is it. It's all linked. It's all coming together. And then, I had to go to work. I work at the same place where my wife is. And I get there and I'm like making coffee. I'm like jittery. I'm like, you're not going to believe this. Like I found it. I've worked it out. Like, you know what I mean? And she's just looking at me like, no, I think you've lost it. It kind of burst my bubble a little bit, but I've found the place. So I am going to go and, just drive around and get a feel for it. But I just thought it was a really interesting little coincidence that it's now called the Crosby Road. And leads
and
back
why would
into
they
Black
change
Hope.
it? Yeah, why are they changing the name?
Why? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the Texas Rangers. They're hypnotizing people into forgetting.
Nothing happened here at all.
Yeah.
Just move along, folks.
Yeah, but it's just like a handful of the stories that I've found specifically from this area that like people didn't tell me because they were from here. I just happened to find them while researching, I use that word loosely, other stories for like Weekly Creep and stuff like that. So
That's going to be fascinating. This is your next season.
yeah, like if I can, do something with it.
Pull something together.
Yeah, I'll
Just
I'll
taking
try.
it from that angle, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is actually that happened. Like just the fact when you went, well, Crosby's where Black Hope is. It's like, oh, so it could be something. Hellier with Greg and Dana Newkirk. I don't know if you watched that
Oh yeah.
series.
I've
That to
got
me,
like stuff behind me from them.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
I mean, just watching that, it didn't even have to end up with them actually finding goblins or
Yeah.
anything. It was just the journey that was the fun part. And just the whole like peeling back the layers of that onion. So even if it's something that's just personal to you, because I have so much synchronicity in my life, and Kelly as well, that you start going, why are these things like going together? It's just me that it's affecting and synchronistic with me, but is the universe trying to tell me something? I mean,
Yeah, this is it. So no, I'm definitely going to use that. It's given me the motivation to hopefully I've got one day off before my road trip next month or next week. So I'm hoping to get up there, and even if I just get like a silly little TikTok out of it, at least I'll be there. And that's a big thing for me is like I don't know, whatever's wrong with me up here, when I'm in a place that's like tangible and like I can touch the grass.
it's the actual location. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's very I don't know, just it makes a lot more sense to me when I'm like in a location like that. Yeah, yeah.
I get a feel for what the people were feeling and stuff at the time. I mean, obviously things have changed since the 50s, but still.
Yeah, and the nice thing about it, because again, on Google Maps, it is still like a heavily wooded area in a few little spots along the way. So I'm like, oh no, I can definitely see something weird happening out here,
And you don't know. Bigfoot might come out of one of those wooded areas. So then you can just
I'm
put the
here
two
for it.
together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Adam, this has been so much fun. Will you tell the listeners where they can find out more about you and get your podcast and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I use Instagram mostly, Houston_strange on Instagram. If you want, there are video versions of most of the Houston Strange episodes on YouTube, so you can check them out on there. Otherwise, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and I've been telling people, if it's not where you listen to your podcasts, let me know and I'll get it there. Because I think right now it's everywhere. And then, yeah, there's like a back catalog of Weekly Creep stuff as well, if you wanted to check that out. Weekly Creep is still ongoing. It's just not weekly anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
It's been great. You have a great evening.
Thanks, you too.
That was a lot of fun. Did you like it, Kelly?
I did. The episode was fantastic. I wish I could have been there.
And Adam is a lot of fun. You got to meet him when we had our little paranormal podcast happy hour, I guess is what you could say, that we did on Zoom. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
And a wonderful storyteller. I want to thank you guys for joining us on this paranormal conversation. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.